Don't underestimate the importance of Deion Barnes coming back for the Penn State coaching staff this season. And quarterback battle. No. Drew Allar's got this. There can't be a quarterback battle. There can't be, right? Right?
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn. That is FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. My name is Zach Seyko, your host as always. And joining me for the opening segment here is special guest, former Penn State defensive lineman Aeneas Hawkins. And Aeneas, you're the expert on this. This is something that I brought up, but I don't exactly have the expertise to attest to it. But of course, it's great to see you on the other side, and thanks for joining me here.
Yeah, hey, anytime I get to join your show, Zach, is a good day. So thank you for having me again.
Well, I appreciate that. And like I said, the insight that you're going to provide here, because I brought it up and I discussed it. It was the being able to retain Deion Barnes, getting him actually in a more expanded role where he's going to be a recruiting coordinator plus an analyst. So he's finally past that graduate assistant spot. And I say that this is a much bigger deal than people are going to think about this. Like, yeah, it's good. You retain a former Nittany Lion player, someone that's well-liked on staff, but let's put it into perspective here. What does this actually mean for the Penn State coaching staff first, and then we'll get to the team?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of good points that you can make about Deion Barnes and the value he brings to the staff alone. Number one, the first thing that jumps out to me is the fact that he's a Philadelphia guy. He's well respected in that area. We've seen the talent, especially these last few years, that comes out of Philadelphia, and the tie that he has in there, and the ability that he'll bring to the table. In that sense of recruiting, that can't be overstated enough. That dude is a guy who relates to these guys as a former player, like you alluded to, and definitely brings a lot of value in the recruiting ranks, especially. But then when you talk about the coaching side of things, what he brings to the table, I mean, for a young guy, Deion Barnes, and his understanding of a defense from a top-down type of level, able to really coach any position that he's asked to, specializing with the D-line, of course, but is a guy who definitely brings tremendous value in terms of coaching ability.
Yeah, and he's been in Happy Valley for 3 years. James Franklin, very good about trying to get as many former Penn Staters back in the fold as possible. And Deion Barnes is able to at least continue on in this role because just unfortunately, unfortunately, John Scott's doing a hell of a job as the defensive line coach. Ideally, that's where you'd like Deion Barnes to eventually make that jump and then ultimately be a position coach, be a coordinator, and then see where everything takes him here. Now, for the players, because I've heard from you, I've heard from other people, I've heard from fellow reporters that he just gets the response that you want from the team, from the people that he works with closely, like the defensive linemen, and then just anybody that's around him. So Deion Barnes, what kind of impact is he particularly having on the guys on the roster?
Yeah, well, I've been very vocal for a while now about the fact that I think Deion Barnes is a guy who could very well end up being the best D-line coach in the country before his career is all said and done. You spent any amount of time with him. I was the guy that was there for his first year, maybe 2 years. I'm having a hard time remembering. But again, you spend 30 minutes around the guy, and he immediately has your respect. And I think it's evident in the way his players respond to him. Again, like you said, Coach Scott does an outstanding job, and will continue to do an outstanding job. But Coach Barnes brings some value that I have not seen from other coaches in a long time in terms of being able to relate to the players while also still demanding their respect. It's tough as a young coach to deal with a bunch of young men and earn their respect. And he does it in a way where the players feel like, Deion may be able to challenge them in ways that other guys aren't able to, being young, having lived through it as a player, as a guy who's from Philadelphia and spent some time in the NFL. And then again, as a pass rusher specifically, the things that he brings to the table in terms of coaching, in terms of techniques and hand fighting, really to me is second to nothing I experienced in Happy Valley in terms of D-line coaching. So brings tremendous value. I think about a room that's full of these super talented young ends, the Chop Robinsons of the world, the Zariah Fishers, the Smith Vilberts, guys whose ceilings are super duper high. With Deion Barnes fine tuning, you'll continue to see that room's play elevate. And that's why I think it's a huge deal that he's back.
And what does it mean? This is kind of the last idea here about Deion Barnes that I think is worth noting, is that he's moving to this analyst role. So the analyst roles have changed because not too long ago, Nebraska was getting fined and sanctioned for having too many analysts involved in too many different things. Now those rules have been relaxed. So what is Deion Barnes going to be allowed to do since he is moving to this quote unquote analyst role and not necessarily a position coach, an assistant position coach? How is he going to be? How do you think he's going to be different from a graduate assistant now to this analyst recruiting coordinator spot?
Yeah, to be honest, I think the biggest change is just that his voice has the opportunity to be heard more by the people on staff. You know, as a GA, you kind of can be limited in really working with your guys and really having say with your guys. And even that can be limited as a GA. So, you know, as he elevates to this analyst role, I expect him and his coaching philosophies to really show through, obviously with the staff, but even more so with the defensive line as a whole. And rightfully so. Again, you know, he completely surpassed what a typical GA is able to do with a room in his first couple of years in Happy Valley. So I just see his role expanding quickly.
Aeneas Hawkins, former Penn State defensive lineman, joining us here on Locked On Nittany Lions. My name is Zach Seyko, your host. Aeneas, let's take just a quick pause here for our sponsor before we get into the other, the controversial topic around some position battles in Happy Valley. But today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel Sportsbook. This year, the only app you need at your Super Bowl party is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We're really excited about our new sports betting partner of Locked On because they're the #1 sportsbook in America. That is FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make sports betting easy and fun. Download FanDuel now so you can get a Super Bowl 57 no sweat first bet. You'll get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. So no worries here. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line to point spreads to who will score a touchdown even. And personally, I like the Eagles to take Super Bowl 57. I think they win, and I think they covered the spread. And you can bet alongside me at FanDuel Sportsbook because the app is safe, it's secure, and super easy to use. And best of all, you get paid your winnings instantly. So join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim your no sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And thanks again for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. Make sure you check out the brand new show, Locked On College Basketball. Everything you need to know about college basketball all in one place. Plus, you get to hear from big name experts, insiders, players, and coaches. That is Locked On College Basketball, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Special guest Aeneas Hawkins is with me, former Penn State defensive lineman. I am Zach Seyko. If you can see, you're watching us on YouTube, you can see our Twitter handles. Please both give us a follow. And if you're listening, it is at Zach_Seyko and at Aeneas Hawkins. Pretty simple. I got a little bit of the grammar in there for for my handle. But so now, Aeneas, we're seeing the off season start to unfold a little bit. Winter workouts. You understand the process. You know the process. And the coaches, at least for Penn State, are very vocal as far as, well, who's doing well, who's working hard, so that you can kind of follow along. Not everything's so behind the closed doors. So we're seeing, for example, Harrison Trey Wallace winning the battle for the wide receivers, and Marcus Haggins getting involved on his social media saying that, oh, he won his battle today. But what's interesting is two parts here that I want to ask you specifically about, because every time we've spoken, it's Drew Allar is going to be a very good quarterback. We know that. Drew Allar this, Drew Allar that, and you'll hear that all across Penn State and Happy Valley. But I don't think we should be discounting Beau Pribula in any sort of way. He was a 4-star in his own right. Yeah, he wasn't the 99 overall 5-star at the top of 24/7. I get it. But Beau Pribula was a quarterback that was sought after, that the Penn State coaching staff certainly believes in as at least a quality backup here. And now we're starting to see things that aren't just, they're not going to be on a silver platter for Drew, right? James Franklin in his press conference, when asked about it, he said, well, based on the end of the season, Drew Allar is going to get the first reps. But then he added on top of that, that Beau Pribula is going to make this a competition. So we've seen this in the past. Trace McSorley, Tommy Stevens, and then Sean Clifford, Tommy Stevens, Sean Clifford, Will Levis. Here we are with Drew Allar and Beau Pribula. Based on Coach Franklin's comments, do you think that's just to kind of light a fire under everybody? Because competition, you know this, just the competition brings out the best in all of us. But so where do you think James Franklin's words are coming from?
Yeah, well, I hate to kind of be anticlimactic here. Yeah, I think it does light a fire partially. I think that's partially the reason. But truthfully, Drew Allar and Beau are both very young in their careers. And while Drew Allar clearly to everybody is the favorite to land that starting quarterback job, especially week one, Beau is a scholarship guy too. And every word in that locker room says that he's a legitimate quarterback as well. So, I don't read too much into it. Obviously with winter workouts here, you find out a lot about what you have in your room and who's willing to compete and who can really operate when the bullets are flying around them, so to say. And then obviously with spring ball and training camp too, I think there's a lot of football left to be played. I think Drew is the rightful favorite based on what we saw last season. Yeah. But we are very early in this process to count out Beau Pribula as well. That kid is fiery. He's a leader, no different than Drew Allar. And like Coach Franklin said, I do anticipate it to be a competition. And I don't see any answers being resolved until closer to the season.
Yeah, and if you look at, I brought up Marcus Hagen specifically. I saw John Scott post about Zariah Fisher, who's he came back late in the season, but worked his way back from injury. So it's good to see that this hard work's paying off. But you look at Mike Yursic's Twitter page, and it's Beau Pribula day one. All right, okay, the Beau Pribula, that's a good start. You want to make the impression on day one since you are the underdog, so to speak, and then. Day two, it's not Jackson Smolik. I know there's three quarterbacks in the room, but it's Beau Pribula again. How do you think do you think the players pay too much to those social media posts? Like what kind of feeling does that draw that, hey, this is our champion of the day, essentially? Is that, again, good for the competition, or is it like, man, I feel kind of slighted here?
Yeah, it's all about competition, man. I remember as a player myself, I'd get done with a winter workout. If I had a good winter workout, I'd turn on the notifications of my position coach to see if I was going to go win it. Never did, but that's okay. But again, winter workouts are so intense. And there's so much that happens over the course of a winter workout that really the finest detail can kind of elevate a winner versus a loser for the day. It's not a jealousy thing. Again, it comes back to the idea of competition and really driving it. And credit to Coach Franklin and his staff. Those awards are legitimate. The players in that locker room know who the competitor of the day was. They know why. And it really just serves as motivation to go back the next day and try to get a win yourself. So I don't see it as anything too major. Or credit to Beau, workout warrior, apparently, because again, they don't just hand those awards out. But I will not be surprised when I see Drew Allar or that young guy go win one either.
Yeah, Jackson. Good to see him at camp. And James Franklin did comment that he's still, even though he's only 1 year behind Beau and Drew, that he's still, of course, got a lot of work to do. And it's good that he's enrolled early. So that brings me kind of to my last question. I want to get your opinion on it. The transfer portal is going to open up one more time here. There's going to be another cycle. And I've commented on this on other episodes because Ohio State and Michigan have done this, and that's who Penn State seems to be chasing after all the time, right? They went out and got that grad transfer quarterback, essentially. I've compared it to like that Chase Daniel or the Brian Hoyer of that journeyman kind of quarterback, but it's different in the NFL because you can go be a number 2, number 3 and collect that paycheck. Even with NIL, it's not really quite like that, but we've seen Ohio State do it, go get a 7th-year guy to hopefully push Kyle McCord and Devin Brown and provide some depth here, maybe even win a battle. Who knows? He played at Oregon State. He's been everyone makes fun of Sean. This guy's Tristan Gebbia has been in college football for 7 years.
It's a long time to play college football. Yeah.
So, and then the same thing. So Jack Tuttle, you remember Jack Tuttle to Indiana. Yep. Now he's at Michigan as a backup. Why do they need a backup? JJ McCarthy's there. Because they wanted to improve the depth. So
Yep.
my question in short here is, should Penn State follow this model? Or James Franklin said in a perfect world, he'd like to do this, but how aggressive do you think they're going to be in trying to possibly get a veteran QB to balance out the depth in the quarterback room?
Yeah, I think, Coach Franklin would agree. It's always good to have depth, especially in that quarterback room. We've seen Penn State in recent years have quarterback depth really cost them some big games at pivotal moments. So obviously you want to drive that. I think, to me, the question is there a fit in the second round of the transfer portal for what Coach Franklin and his offense do? They ask a lot of their quarterbacks. A lot of times they ask them to be able to move around the pocket and extend plays when they need to. And those guys don't grow on trees all the time. So finding a guy who really can fit in, and also a guy that can come in and realistically compete with the Drew Allar and push those guys isn't necessarily to find in the second window. But I assure you, if that opportunity is there, especially to build depth in a young room, Coach Franklin and his staff will take it.
Aeneas Hawkins, former Penn State defensive lineman and Penn State football expert, as far as I can tell. And I hope listeners and viewers can see that as well. Aeneas, thanks, as always, for a great conversation, and can't wait to have you back on in the near future.
Thanks for having me, Zach. Enjoyed myself, brother.
Welcome back to Locked On Nittany Lions. My name is Zach Seyko, your host, and a big thank you to Aeneas Hawkins for joining me on the opening half of the show to discuss Deion Barnes, of course, a very integral part of the coaching staff, if you need to believe it. And the idea that there's a quarterback battle going on. Drew Allar, not the bona fide starter here. Beau Pribula is making this worth a discussion. And this really reminds me of the Trace McSorley and Tommy Stevens situation, where it felt like it was a neck and neck battle. And then ultimately Trace was by far and above the favorite. And if you look back at that quarterback battle, the difference in that was the fact that Trace was better at reading defenses. That's what kept him on the field. It's why Sean Clifford was on the field a lot. But there was a reason that Drew Allar was quarterback number 2 the entire season. And James Franklin admitted that. He said, well, if you were going to put out a depth chart based on the end of last season, Drew Allar would be our starting quarterback. Okay. I think that's very fair. And that's the right thing. But he said, Beau Pribula is going to make this a competition. And then if you're watching the winter, now the winter workouts are showcasing effort, and they're showcasing athleticism, and they're showcasing what a player is willing to do to get ahead in the competition. So these are important. And to see Beau Pribula win them back to back, especially since there are only 3 quarterbacks in the room. There's not that many to pick from. And it's not that I don't expect Jackson Smolik maybe to win one here or there, but it really should be back and forth. Drew Allar, Beau Pribula, Drew Allar, whatever order. It should be pretty even here. But Beau Pribula, I've been told, and what people have seen is that he has the it factor. This is why it's a competition to begin with, because he, at his base, is a football player. He just has that mentality. He has that work ethic, which is why it's showing up in the winter workouts and naming a player of the day at the position, right? It shows up in what James Franklin brought up in his press conference. Leadership. Leadership is going to be key this year because Penn State has to replace all 6 of its captains. And that's going to be tougher in more places than just one. Sean Clifford, PJ Mustipher, Jair Brown, Juice Scruggs, Chris Stoll, Jonathan Sutherland. Those guys were all veterans in the program. And now you're not only getting, yes, a new leader at quarterback, and you want your quarterback to be a captain. I think whoever ultimately wins this, I think I'm going to lean Drew Allar here. But I definitely buy some stock in Beau Pribula. He came to Penn State for a reason. He didn't go anywhere else. He was a 4-star once upon a time, and he was a competitor at his high school. When he was at Central York, that team was very good. They were very competitive. And I think he has the underdog mentality, that he doesn't have as much to lose. He's kind of the assumed backup quarterback, and this is going to be fun for him. This is going to be a lot of fun for him. So it's important to watch this battle unfold. But my X factor here for the Drew Allar, Beau Pribula battle, if there is one, or unless James Franklin is just saying that to light some fires, which is fine. You want to create competition. You want to get your players to work their hardest. You want Drew Allar not to sit back and assume that he's going to be the starter, that he's going to be the number one guy from day one, because then that doesn't build good chemistry. That doesn't build a locker room. That builds that sense of entitlement that he didn't earn it and that he was just handed the keys to the Penn State offense. And no, that's not going to be the case. So, but the difference here is that leadership is going to come into a factor. This is going to factor in extremely, because not only do you have a first-time starting quarterback for the past 4 years that isn't Sean Clifford, you are also getting 6 brand new captains. And I'm not saying that, well, if Beau Pribula acts as a better leader, Drew Allar is not going to have the starting spot. But that's going to carry more weight than you might expect. Let's just say that. If Drew Allar doesn't have command of the huddle, if Drew Allar doesn't have command of the locker room, if the players, the teammates gravitate to Beau Pribula, that is going to go a longer way than you might expect. And where these two really differ, Drew's got all the arm talent in the world. Beau Pribula is a dual threat. Beau Pribula does emulate Trace McSorley. And Penn State's most success on offense was with who at quarterback? Trace McSorley. So I'm going to feed into this quarterback competition because Beau Pribula is a legitimate contender at some point in time to be a starting quarterback at Penn State. I'm not saying it's this season. I'm not saying it's next season. But at some point in time, I really do think we're going to be seeing Beau Pribula up on the Jumbotron in Beaver Stadium, announced as the starter. So it's to do two things. This quarterback battle is to get the most competition that they can, because you don't want one of your quarterbacks having this sense of entitlement. And then on top of that, it really does boil down to leadership and not just necessarily overall talent. At the end of the day, Penn State really does need some new leaders to step up. And Beau Pribula has that in his personality. I would imagine that Drew does too. I just don't hear about it as much. I've actually heard more about Beau just being that guy. You know, he's the guy. He's got the dog in him. He's got that personality. He has the it factor. He's a winner. I hear Drew as he's an athlete. He's very good. He's calm. He's composed, and that's fine. But there's an edge to Beau Pribula. Not to say that Drew doesn't have one. I'm just hearing it more about the number 2 quarterback, supposedly. So this is just an interesting conversation. I think at the end of the day, what this means a little more, and what James Franklin said in his press conference, is the fact that this quarterback room might be good enough on its own, while inexperienced, to survive without going and getting extra depth, that they feel comfortable with these 3 quarterbacks and that they don't have to go get a supplemental piece. That Drew Allar, Beau Pribula, whoever it is, Jackson Smolik's different, okay? He's a true freshman. If you see him on the field, that means Penn State's had a bad season, okay? Something's wrong here. It would have been the same if you said, oh, well, Beau Pribula's in 2022. Yeah, something is seriously wrong if Beau Pribula saw the field last year. But I think that's what Penn State fans need to be excited about and realize that, okay, Drew Allar's not going to be handed this. Beau Pribula is a legitimate quarterback. He's not just some name in the room. And that's just good news overall for Penn State football, that it's going to go from Sean Clifford to Drew Allar and then most likely Beau Pribula. And that Beau Pribula is going to push Drew Allar to be his best, and then vice versa. Drew Allar works hard. I think Beau Pribula works hard too. So if anything, Penn State fans should be excited that this isn't just a one-dimensional battle, that it's not, well, you know, Drew Allar, because he's so much better than everybody else, that he was just given the offense and that we know he's going to be the guy. No, the Penn State fans should welcome the fact that Beau Pribula is getting the attention, is pushing Drew Allar, and the coaches think that he works his tail off and has a lot of potential. So I think that's the ultimate takeaway here, but we'll keep an eye on it as it unfolds. It's only couple of winter workouts in, and one press conference. So we'll keep an eye on it. And break that all down here on Locked On Nittany Lions. Coming up in some future episodes, of course, the positional breakdowns will continue. You had Media Day, so you want to talk about that, of course, get some perspective on Deion Barnes as well. So that's why Aeneas Hawkins was on this episode, and can't wait to have him back on another time. Of course, thanks again, as always, for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen every single day. Check out Locked On College Basketball wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Everything you need to know about college basketball in one place. Plus, you get to hear from big name experts, insiders, players, and coaches. That is Locked On College Basketball. And thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions. So much support on the YouTube channel. Thank you for over 850 subscribers. Help us get to 900. That will help. So we'll continue with the positional breakdowns. Penn State wrestling is getting really close to the postseason. Penn State men's basketball trying to fight for something in the postseason. And same thing with Penn State men's hockey. So plenty going on here in the winter season. But of course, whenever you need your Penn State content, it'll all be right here on Locked On Nittany Lions.